Hey guys, welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. And it's been a while since I've done a live. In this live, we're going to go through the letter from Stephen Smith's mother, Sandy, to the FBI dated 28th of September 2016. Oh boy, if my voice starts off this way, who knows where it's gonna go from here. Can I just ask you guys, by the way, thanks a lot. Is it Estelle Pretorius? Thanks very much. And also Flower Goddess. Thanks, guys. Can I just ask you guys, how many of you have read the letter? Any of you here read the letter? Chelsea, good to see you. Annie, hi from the UK, good to see you as well. Mel Stiller, good to see you. Bria, nice to see you as well. Isimko Valinsky. Stephanie and I have been sort of talking about the case a little bit, directly. Tammy says, I have. Elise says, no, not yet. So I was trying to decide, should I read through the whole letter and then analyze it? Or do you want me to read and analyze, like read, analyze? Because it's a 4-page letter. I suppose I could read it in one go over about 8 minutes or so. Would you like me to read the whole letter and then come back and deal with it piece by piece? Read, then analyze. Okay, I'll do that. Have you guys got your notebooks handy? Sharon says, I haven't read it yet. So for those who haven't read it, I think it's probably a good thing if we can go through it, the whole thing from top to bottom, and then deal with it and sort of break it down. Do you guys agree with that? So sorry to those who want to do read and analyze. Looks like most of you. Kristen says, I'm going to get my notebook. Elise says, I've got my notebook. That's good. Okay, so I'll do that. So those who have read it, maybe you want to go make a cup of coffee. Join me in about 5 minutes. Okay, so are you guys ready to get started? Now, it's typical True Crime Rocket Science protocol. There's actually an address at the top. I don't really know whether to publish it or not. I'm talking about the address, apparently, of Sandy. But there's also a phone number given, and it's hard to say, do you want that phone number published in the media? And so I've just redacted it just to be safe. But I mean, it has been published in the media. By the way, here's Timmy. He says hello. Before I read this out, just a quick thank you so much for the many of you who've subscribed to the Team Peachtree channel. It's now hit the 1,000 subscriber mark with like 10 days to spare. So thanks very much to you guys. I've now got to, in order to monetize that channel, I've now got to get it up to 4,000 hours worth of watching. I'm only at about 1,700. So now I've got to start putting up content. So I'll put something up on Timmy, just having quite a sweet moment with another dog. Goes on for about 8 minutes. If you haven't watched that, make sure you go and check it out. Okay, everyone got their notebooks? Everyone ready? Let's have a look at this. I'm going to do it like that. Okay. So the date is September 28th, 2016. And I'm just going to read it through and then we'll come back and do the analysis, right? Yeah, Stephen has a twin sister. Her name is Stephanie. Her mother is Sandy. And then Stephen's father actually died, I think 3 months after he did, which is quite incredible. Okay, so here we go. September 28, 2016, FBI headquarters, Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington. Stephen Smith murder investigation. Dear sir or madam, my family is in desperate need of your help. My 19-year-old son, Stephen Nicholas Smith, was murdered on July 8, 2015 in Hampton County, South Carolina. It has been apparent from the first week of this investigation that authorities are covering up critical evidence and we no longer know who to trust. Stephen's father, my ex-husband, who's now deceased, and I were first told that our son was shot to death after running out of gas in the early hours of the morning and exiting his vehicle. Later that day, we were told it was a hit and run. Finally, investigators determined he was beaten to death. He was attacked so violently that the entire side of his face was rebuilt with putty for his funeral. Hampton investigators asked us at that time to continue to publicly say it was a hit and run. That's quite interesting. They claimed they didn't want the killer to know they were looking for him. There have been no named suspects. The first call my family received after the murder was from authorities notifying us of Stephen's death. The second came very quickly the same morning from solicitor Randolph Murdoch. In fact, he called my ex-husband's cell phone as we waited in the police station for a positive identification. He said he heard of the case and was interested in working pro bono as a liaison between the family and investigators. Stephen's father accepted the offer, although we were unsure why Mr. Murdoch wanted to help us. We also weren't sure how he found out so quickly, even before it was confirmed to be our son. Surprisingly, after just a few interactions, Mr. Murdoch stopped returning our calls. Within days of our son's death, Stephen's twin sister, Stephanie, was approached multiple times by peers, telling her that Solicitor Murdoch's nephews were responsible. Who do you think that's in reference to? As a family, it was suspicious to us since he had taken such an immediate interest in the case and then became unreachable so quickly. These suspicions reached new heights weeks later when Stephen's older brother, Chris, right? So he has a sister, Stephanie, an older brother, Chris, as well, and then his father who died. His mother's name's Sandy. She's the one who wrote this letter. Chris was approached at work by a young man he did not know. This person told Chris that he was present when Stephen was murdered and witnessed everything firsthand. So you're literally having someone here saying, I witnessed the murder of Stephen Smith. He said that Solicitor Murdoch's nephew, Buster Murdoch, who graduated with Stephen, beat Stephen to death with a baseball bat. He claimed it was because Stephen was gay. Stephen was, in fact, gay. The witness said they were out smashing mailboxes when they came upon Stephen. I understand that to mean the witness was out smashing mailboxes, not Stephen or the murderer. The witness was out smashing mailboxes. And then I'm not sure what that means. Buster seized the opportunity. The young man told Chris that Buster threatened to kill him, the witness, if he ever spoke up. This information was given to investigators, but nothing has come of it. In reviewing a copy of the 911 dispatch log, which I've enclosed, tab A, page 2, I found that the first responding officer, Michael Bridges, arrived on the scene within a minute of 911's dispatch. First responding officer was on scene within a minute of the dispatch. Even though in the Hampton County Sheriff's Office incident report, he claimed to have driven around for a while trying to find my son's body. The second officer, Jason Eubanks, arrived within 2 minutes. This is suspicious to me because the area where my son was placed is extremely rural. Cops do not patrol that area frequently, and it's not likely an officer, much less two, would coincidentally be patrolling there prior to 5 a.m. They had to be in that area at that time for a reason. I suspect that they were there because they already knew Stephen was there, and I suspect the Murdochs were the ones who told them. The Murdochs are probably the most prominent family in Hampton County. Stephen had on more than one occasion mentioned to friends and his twin sister that he was involved romantically with someone from a prominent family. Someone in the county was hiding his sexuality. He said that it would shock people to know this person was gay. We suspect this could be the young man Stephen was referring to, though he never named him. At the beginning of the investigation, officers told us that they would not have access to Stephen's text messages for approximately a year. They claimed they would have to send the phone to Apple to override the security features. We found out months later the phone had never been sent to Apple. Often investigators claimed it was uncertain which department had the phone. They have since produced the phone, which they still have not sent to Apple, but still claim they cannot access it. So you would imagine that's one thing that you can't make the excuse for in 2023. Oh, we can't access the contents of the phone, right? Anyway, we feared then and still fear now that they have and will continue to delete critical information from the phone. It has already been over a year and we have no knowledge of who Stephen interacted with by phone call or text prior to his murder. Now, I just want to stop there just for a moment and say either way you kind of win in this situation. If you are able to retrieve all the content on the phone, then well done, you've retrieved that content and you can look at what it reveals. On the other hand, if content has been deleted, then that is a sure sign that something is being covered up. So just that, just just if it's ascertained that contents from the phone has been deleted, that is going to reinforce the notion that there's been a cover-up, right? Let me just say one more time that if they do retrieve the data on the phone and nothing has been deleted, then that would tend to show that nothing is being covered up, that there's no real attempt to cover up, right? And so that is going to be a big indicator one way or the other. Does that make sense? That's exactly it. The absence of evidence is evidence. Absolutely right. Okay, let's continue. Since the murder, Buster's gotten rid of his old vehicle, which is critical because according to the witness who approached Chris, they were traveling in Buster's old vehicle that night. It's also critical because Stephen was found 3 miles from his vehicle on the morning of his murder. There was no blood spat on the crime scene despite his brutal beating, which makes it clear he was transported to that site. We believe there is DNA in Buster's old vehicle. I think it's important to note that Stephen's wallet was found in his own vehicle and his gas cap was open, further suggesting he did not leave willingly. Stephen was very skittish and would never have walked down the road in the dark, and it's not likely he would have opened his car door to accept assistance from someone he did not know, especially alone on a dark country road. So now we've got 2 pages left to go, really 1 page and a half. Sorry, I'm going to need to sneeze. Sorry, I was trying to mute that, but I just not quite in time. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Stephanie says, I thought his phone was found on him. Let's just see. Did I miss something? His phone was found on him. Did I miss something? Stephen was very skittish. Okay. His autopsy shows. So I think Stephanie asked me about, or somebody asked about toxicology reports. There it is, negative for drugs and alcohol. So she says, I have no reason to believe he would have done something so completely out of character. Since Stephen was placed on the highway, it became a highway patrol investigation. We thought this was beneficial to Stephen since local authorities obviously have their own agenda. However, this did not help our case at all. This case was mysteriously bounced from investigator to investigator without reasons or notification. It would repeatedly get to a certain point, then the assigned investigators would bow out, perhaps not wanting to take on Solicitor Murdoch. I was approached in September 2015 by a gentleman claiming to know about a criminal case decades ago that was swept under a rug to protect a different member of the Murdoch family. This came as no surprise to me. I see history repeating itself with my son. No one here is trying to solve our case. Therefore, I contacted Governor Nikki Haley that same month with a plea for help. I wrote her a letter telling her basically word for word the story I've just explained to you. She responded promptly and assigned the case to new investigators. While it appeared to be the answer to our prayers, very little progress has been made, and they say they have exhausted their leads. I cannot fathom how this is possible. Our concerns regarding Solicitor Murdoch and his family have not been investigated, despite witness accounts which include an alleged conversation between a schoolmate of Buster's little brother Paul and school officials. I was told he claimed to have knowledge, so that the schoolmate of Buster's little brother claimed to have knowledge of the murder and implicated Buster as the murderer. Sorry, that I think is referring to Paul, that the schoolmate understood that Paul claimed to have knowledge of the murder and implicated Buster as the murderer. Those school officials were said to have discussed the statement with the student's family, not police. We have heard no further follow-up to the situation. Interestingly, according to my source, Paul was transferred from that school to a private school after the alleged statement. We believe Solicitor Murdoch's influence extends to the pathologist, Dr. Erin Presnell of MUSC, who performed Stephen's autopsy. Though Deputy Coroner Kelly Green and SLED agent Brittany Burke were both present for the autopsy, have gone on the record to state that neither made any mention of a car striking Stephen. Dr. Presnell ruled his death a hit and run. She was combative with the Highway Department investigator, Todd Proctor, regarding her findings when he pointed out that the only trauma was to Stephen's head. He asked how she came to that conclusion, and she said it was because he was found in the road. That alone was her reason. She insisted hit and run, despite the fact that neither his injuries nor the crime scene support that finding. The coroner disagrees with her determination, and it is documented multiple times in the case file that there were no skid marks or vehicle debris consistent with a hit and run at the crime scene. Dr. Presnell herself confirmed to investigator Proctor that she found no glass or other fragments on the body to suggest a hit and run. It is simply not possible that a vehicle struck solely his head. Coroner Ernie Washington informed investigator Proctor that Dr. Presnell told him she would change her report to read however he wanted it. Fourth and final page. Investigator Proctor's summary notes which document his discussions with Dr. Presnell and Coroner Washington are enclosed. We desperately need your help. This investigation is being deliberately derailed. We need someone to hold the investigators accountable and access Stephen's phone. Solicitor Murdoch is widely known, and it appears this is playing to his advantage. We need someone who doesn't care about his family name to take this case seriously. In July 2016, I wrote to Attorney General Loretta Lynch in the hopes that she could and would help us. But has been no response. So she's kind of really made an effort. She's contacted Nikki Haley, now the Attorney General, and then the FBI as well. She writes, I've enclosed the key documents I mentioned above, but I can provide copies of all the case documents I have at your request. We also have new information which we discovered in the past few weeks that we feel is critical to this case. However, I no longer trust the investigators here. I am holding it as I wait your response. I can be reached at that number. I thank you immensely for your time and help. Sincerely, Sandra Smith. And then there are those enclosures. And I can tell you that I've read a couple of those. I haven't read all of them, but I've read the case file notes. I've read the autopsy report. Are there 6 over here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I've read 6 of these 7 attachments. And then I've also looked at the incident photos, which are too graphic to share with you guys. But to me, that is the whole case in a nutshell. I think if you can see those incident, if you can see the photos from the incident, it gives you an immediate sense of what more likely happened and what less likely happened. Cami says, this has been a great series so far. I like that you challenge us to use critical thinking. Okay, so what I want to ask you guys is the following question. If, and think about it carefully, if there is a cover-up, does that mean someone was murdered? Let me ask that again. If there's a cover-up, does that mean Stephen was murdered? See what you guys say. Please do vote in the poll if you haven't already. Let's see what you guys have said so far. Let's see if I can find it. Timmy, stop snoring. So let's see. Sandy thinks Buster killed Stephen, 22%. A lot of hearsay, very few facts, 15%. The Murdochs are involved somehow, 31%. And then we know very little about what happened, 33%. That's actually the most. And I must say, I'm quite astonished by those numbers. So basically, 54% either think that Buster killed Stephen or the Murdochs are involved somehow. And then 50%, almost 50%, what is it? 46% say we don't have enough information, we don't have enough facts. So that's quite an interesting split. Do you guys agree with that? It's quite rare that you see such a almost diametrically opposite view. So let's have a look. Yvonne says not necessarily. Sarah Braswell says, why would someone cover up an accident? Well, you can still be liable for an accident. You know, if you're driving and you knock someone over, you know, you can still be liable. If you were driving and maybe looking at your phone and you hit someone and you didn't do it intentionally, but in a way it was your mistake, you know, that could be the same thing, right? Stephanie says accidental hit, purposeful cover-up. So here are a couple of options. One is that a member of the Murdoch family murdered Stephen Smith, and so that's why it was covered up. There's another possibility. A vehicle that belonged to John Murdoch, you know, it was part of his rental operation, was driven by another driver, but it was his vehicle that knocked Stephen over, and maybe he didn't have insurance, or maybe it shouldn't have been operating at that time of night. Another possibility is that it could be some third party who is wealthy or well known. In other words, it's a prominent figure in that area, and he didn't want to get into trouble. And then I guess the fourth option is that when Randy Murdoch offered to be the liaison between the police and the Smith family, he didn't realize, so he was just doing his job, you know, kind of as an ambulance chaser, kind of as a personal injury dude. He was just doing his due diligence only to find out, wow, this guy used to be a classmate of my nephew, my brother's son. So that's not going to look good, or there's going to be questions raised regarding that. I don't know. So there are definitely a couple of options to look at here. Before we deal with a more fine-tuned analysis of this letter, I want to bring your attention to a couple of articles. So the first one is, well, let me just do this. I'm going to put it on the screen this way rather. Can you guys see that? Now I do want to play it. I want to play the audio so that we can hear it. But can you read what is said there? This was the statement made during the sort of press conference when someone made some kind of comment about Buster. And this is the point that I want to emphasize here. We've just read this letter and we're going to go through it again, right? Think about the sentiments in that letter and the sentiment in this statement made seven to 8 years later. Let me read it. Buster is a victim. He lost a mother, brother, now his father's in jail. Buster, as we know, has got nothing to do with this. And whatever is mentioned in the records, that's what investigators are going to look at. But we have no knowledge at all about Buster or the Murdochs having anything to do with this right now. We're starting with a fresh set of eyes. In other words, Sandy's lawyer made a statement, was it yesterday, to the media that we have no knowledge at all about Buster or the Murdochs having anything to do with this. Right now, I think right now is a bit of a qualifier. In other words, what he's saying is, as far as he's concerned, there are absolutely no facts, there's no evidence, there's no clear indicator that implicates either Buster or any of the other Murdochs. Can you see how that is extremely different to the timber of the letter? Do you guys notice that? That is not a statement from Buster's cheerleaders. That's a statement from the Stephen Smith's mother's lawyer, right? Do you guys follow that? So I want to show you a couple of the latest headlines. Start with this one. Right, South Carolina lawyers take on Stephen Smith death case as plans to exhume body progress. So can you see there? Can you see over there? Bland Richter firm announced representation. Right? Can you guys see that? Is that visible on your screen? Right? So this statement is coming from one of the South Carolina lawyers representing Stephen Smith's mother, right? You see the word Bland there. Well, that is from Bland. That is from the same lawyer. It's not Buster's cheerleaders. This is from Stephen Smith's lawyers, Stephen Smith's mother's lawyer. Shall I make it a bit bigger? There you can see Bland. Can you see that? Eveline says the lawyer doesn't want to commit libel. Yeah, so the statement is from Sandy's own lawyer. They are afraid of defamation, harassment charges. So, you know, I said this even before I think they did. I was saying, let's have a look at the Stephen Smith case and not have a preconceived notion. In other words, not be like, Buster's the murderer, how it's not a question of if the Murdochs are involved, how are they involved, right? And I was saying, let's actually just look at this case from the beginning and just try and figure it out. Well, it looks like I've just lost 25 people watching because maybe you don't want to hear that. It has to be Buster responsible. And so what I'm trying to tell you, what I'm trying to show you is that the timbre of the vibe, the spirit of Sandy's letter is that it has to be Buster and it has to be the Murdochs involved, whereas her own lawyers are saying, right? Look at these words here. We have no knowledge at all about Buster or the Murdochs having anything to do with this right now, and so I suppose that could change. They might find something on his phone. They might find, if they launch a new investigation, they might find some details. They might be able to call up Crichton Waters and say, what can you tell us, right? And he says, we're starting with a fresh set of eyes, right? And it's a kind of a conversation I was having with Stephanie. It's just that we're the true crime community, right? And it seems like when you have the option between murder and an accident, it seems like we refuse to consider, it's an insult, it's absolutely unacceptable to consider the possibility that something could be an accident. Every time somebody dies, they have to have been murdered in a high-profile situation, right? If Nicola Bulley fell into the river, or whatever, disappeared, she has to have been murdered. If Kylie Rodney, same thing, she has to have been murdered. And you've just kind of got to wonder, is there kind of a feeding frenzy going on with the true crime community that when someone disappears, it's got to be murder? And I don't want to think about it being anything else. What does that say about our ability to think critically? And what does that say about us who care about the law, truth, and justice when you want to start accusing people without evidence? Basically defaming people, and obviously if you're right, then it's not defamatory, but if you're wrong, it is, right? And so is it so hard just to go down that path where you say, let's gather information, let's just see where the evidence takes us, right? And it is quite gratifying to see that 15% say there's a lot of hearsay, very few facts, and we know very little about what happened. And I know most of the people on my channel don't want to hear that. They want to hear, let's hear the story about why Buster Murdoch had to have done this. So what I want to do is take you through Sandy's letter, right? And I want you to try and think about the letter in a different way. I want you to try and think of the letter, first of all, with an open mind, not taking what she says as gospel, but nevertheless regarding it with respect and with with the appropriate amount of focus, but also looking at exactly what you see right next to me. The fact that when she hires lawyers, they say that they don't have any knowledge. You would imagine with a client like Sandy, who would have told them everything she knows, they're making an official statement here that they don't have any knowledge about Buster or the Murdochs having anything to do with this right now. And that doesn't mean that later on that'll be the case. It simply means that they're saying Right now, we don't have kind of a smoking gun, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so what I want to do as well is I just want to show you something else that's worth looking at. Now, someone gave me this information, or I saw this information on Web Sleuth. I'll blow it up in a second. And to be honest, I wasn't sure whether I believed it. So I wanted to know what the source was. And then I was pointed in this direction to News Nation. And even though I trust News Nation, I'm still a little concerned that is this verifiable information? And that's thinking critically and not accepting absolutely everything that you're told. Right? So let's have a look at this. Let me take myself out of that. Okay. So this is from News Nation. What is known is that Alex Murdoch and his brother Randy came to the scene of Stephen Smith's death, going through the crime tape. No one is sure why the brothers were there, but inconsistencies in the initial investigation have left many wondering why his death was never investigated as a homicide. Now, when I read that, I was sort of wondering, aren't you confusing this with the boat crash incident? And as far as I know, in that incident, was it Alex and Randolph, his father, went under the crime scene tape, right? I was sort of wondering, hasn't someone gotten confused between these two? And it appears that the answer is no. These are two separate incidents. It is very curious that Alex Murdoch himself is at the scene of Stephen Smith's death that he actually wrote out there. And then this is where you kind of got to ask the question, was he there because he was thinking about taking on a case and it's not that far from Moselle? Or in other words, was he there because it's his job to be there? Or was he there because he had some other interest, some other connection? Anyway, so let's go to the next part of this. Okay. According to Sandy Smith, this is from News Nation. According to Sandy Smith, Randy Murdoch called the family following Stephen Smith's death, offering to help however he could. However, his law firm has since disputed that, putting out a statement denying it ever happened. Now, I've got to say that certainly gets the hairs on the back of my neck up a little bit, because now it's getting almost like a contest. Someone must be telling a lie in this situation, right? Someone must be telling a lie. So who is? Then the last thing I want to mention, I'm just going to go down here. Stephen Smith's father died just 3 months after his son. Sandy Smith said that her ex-husband died of a broken heart, and so on and so on. But I found this really interesting if it's true. Really interesting if it's true. Good point. It's a good point, Cotton Star. By the way, you can thank Cotton Star for the fact that I'm even dealing with the Murdoch case at all. I actually said to Cotton Star when he told me about it, you know what, I'm not going to be dealing with the Murdoch case, and I gave him a couple of reasons. And I actually said on Patreon, these are the reasons I'm not going to be dealing with the Murdoch case. And Cotton Star was quite clever because he said to me, the murder of Rebecca Zahau, the way that the intrigue surrounding that is similar to this case. And just because I've written 2 books about Rebecca Zahau, just that comment made me curious, and so curiosity has meant that because I was curious, I went down the rabbit hole, and I'm still running through those rabbit holes. So thanks a lot, Cotton Star. Yeah, and I think there were quite a few of us who said, this is not really my my cup of tea, but I must say, even just the Stephen Smith case is quite fascinating, just to try and figure out what's going on. So Erica says, thank you, Cotton Star. Okay, is there anything else I want to show you before I continue? Let's have a look here. Just a quick picture of Stephen's mother, right? Let's do it like that. And so Sandy has written this letter. We're now going to go through this letter slower and try to deal with it in a scientific way, I think is the best way to say it. So where is it? There it is. Okay. Are you guys ready? So the first thing to note is that when it's written, September 2016. So at this point, just over a year had gone by, and you kind of would imagine that after the 1-year anniversary, that Sandy must be feeling helpless and hopeless, right? The other thing that I think is very important to note here is that she labels her email Stephen Smith murder investigation. Now, I understand, because she's a mother, and understand, how can I put it? I can understand that there's a lot of emotions and confusion, and it's just such a loaded situation with this case. There are all sorts of other dynamics going on, and secrets, and so on. And so, in a way, you can understand her referring to it as Stephen Smith murder investigation, but that's already making an assumption, right? It's already insisting to the FBI that her son was murdered. And she may be 99% or even 100% sure that her son was murdered, but you can't be that sure. You simply cannot be that sure. And so there's a saying that I kind of quite often put in my, hey, stop snoring. There's a saying that I quite often put in my videos. If one note is wrong, it ruins the whole symphony. And so if you start off your attempt to investigate this, or your attempt to think about this, or your attempt to figure this out through the keyhole that it can only be murder, then that's going to inform your bias, and you're going to be biased. Anything that doesn't fit that, you're not going to want to know. It's going to be selective reality, and that's not what you want to do. What you want is to think about all the possibilities, and you want to think about all the possibilities for as long as you possibly can. You want to be curious, you want to absorb the information, you want to collect information, you want to consider the arguments that support your theory, and you also want to be aware of the arguments that don't support it, right? And even a lawyer in a legal situation needs to be aware of counter arguments so that he can reinforce his case. So it's important to be able to defend your theory based on at least acknowledging the merits of an opposing theory. Does that make sense? So there's nothing crazy or stupid about opening your mind to an alternate explanation. If your explanation can stand up to scrutiny, can stand up to criticism, can stand up to interrogation, can stand up to cross-examination, right? If it can, then it means you are on the right track, that you've got the authentic narrative, that the facts do support a commonsensical sense of what happened. And so that is why you need the scout mindset. That's why you need to be curious, and not a soldier who's decided from the word go, I only want to know that Buster murdered Stephen, and I only want to think about how the Murdochs involved. I'm not interested in anything else. Then you're going to lose your case if you're going to think that way. You need to be investigate with an open mind and see where that investigation leads you, right? Does that make sense? Are you guys following me? Just see some of your latest comments. John, yeah, I get it that I'm supposed to be a 70-year-old Indian from Pakistan or something. I hear that quite a lot. Yeah, play the devil's advocate with yourself. The autopsy is now public. Okay. Okay. What does Stephanie say? Yeah, I do have the autopsy. I'm not going to deal with the autopsy right here. Okay. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the crime scene photos. They actually, if you go and watch some of the documentaries, they're shown very, very briefly. So it's not like you're not going to be able to see them. And even me saying crime scene photos, I think the right term is probably incident photos, because by saying crime scene, you're immediately leading people to believe that it has to be and can only be a crime scene. Okay, so anyway, let's continue. So let's go through this step by step. So that is already showing a very strong bias, right? She's saying this is a murder investigation in 2016. As I said, it's understandable, but her lawyers right now aren't saying it's necessarily a murder investigation. They're saying, let's try and find out what this is. And then as we get information, we may press charges, etc. So here it is. My family is in desperate need of your help. So desperate is the key word there, right? And you can imagine just how desperate she must be, because she's lost her husband and her son. She's lost two members of her family in short shrift, right? You can imagine she is desperate. But we've got to be careful in not getting desperate ourselves, that we cut corners in terms of trying to figure out what happened here, right? Then she says, my 19-year-old son, Stephen Nicholas Smith, was murdered. There it is again, right? We don't know that for a fact. The other thing that I think is interesting is, and I think I'm going to put this question to you guys. I'm going to put this question to you guys. The first question is, was Stephen Smith a classmate of Buster's? That's the first question. See what you guys say. Was Buster Murdoch a classmate of Stephen Smith? Stephanie says yes. CA says they were in the same class. Deborah says, Kristen says, I think they went to the same school. Let's see, just some more comments here. Someone says, I think he may have been a year older. We're gonna deal with some of those questions in a moment. Yes, they played ball together. Okay, so the first question is, were Buster and Stephen classmates? Yes, that's the right answer. Here's the next question, which I think a lot of people may not realize. Were they classmates at the time that Stephen Smith died? Were they classmates in 2015 at the time Stephen Smith died? Can you see how that's already shifting your knowledge base? If you're told over and over again that they went to the same high school, they were in the same class, they played for the same baseball team, right? And the fact is right over here is the word, well, can you see there, my 19-year-old son, right? He died at the age of 19, not 18. So where do you think he was at the age of 19? That's a good answer from Bria. That's also a good answer from Julia. That's a good answer. They graduated from school together, yes, but the question is, at the time Stephen died, were they in the same class? So that's right. I'm not quite sure if it's in the letter, but it is mentioned elsewhere that Stephen was studying nursing and his ambition was ultimately to become a doctor. Charlotte says, I voted too soon. I've changed my mind. How do you want to change your mind? So can you see how we've already shifted the narrative slightly? So yes, they were classmates. Yes, they did play on the same baseball team. Yes, they were in the same high school. But crucially, in the year that he died, no, they were not classmates then, right? And so that immediately changes things actually quite drastically. And you might want to kind of say, Jeepers, isn't that an important point that maybe either you left out or that you need to acknowledge? I'm talking about someone making a documentary or someone kind of telling a news story, right? Then the other thing that's just worth noting is that he died in July, right? That was a Wednesday. I presume it was Tuesday the 7th going into July 8th, early Wednesday morning. And so that's also quite important, is that he died on a weekday. And that kind of suggests that he couldn't have been part of some sort of party in the same way that Kylie Rodney was. It had to have been some different type of situation. And then the other thing that's important is that he was killed in Hampton County. And just that alone, the fact that he is killed in Hampton County, that does open up a door, the first door to possible influence from the Murdochs, right? If he was killed in another county, I think you could say, why would the Murdochs necessarily care? But the fact that he died in Hampton County, okay, are the Murdochs involved in some way, right? Then she says, it has been apparent from the first week of this investigation that authorities are covering up critical evidence and we no longer know who to trust. So the fact that she was first told that Stephen was shot to death is, I think, it's understandable that she would then go from that point to thinking, but wasn't he shot to death all this time? And so I wonder if you could speak to her now, if you could speak to Sandy now, and you said, do you still believe your son was shot? Well, the evidence doesn't support that. The autopsy doesn't support any kind of bullet projectile, right? Let me be explicit about this. The first thing that Sandy was told was that Stephen was shot. And you might say, well, wasn't he? Oh, and then they covered that up by saying it was hit and run. But the fact is that was a mistake to say that he was shot, and it would be natural to assume with a hole in his skull above his right eye, right? It would be natural to assume what could have made that hole. Well, a bullet. And then what happened is that they searched for a bullet. They searched the surrounding scene for a bullet. They were starting to turn the scene into a homicide investigation, but then they couldn't find the bullet, and the autopsy showed that it wasn't a bullet scenario. There was no path of a bullet through the brain. And so, in other words, they made, I think the first assumption was that it may have been a hit and run, then it was a homicide, and then they went back to, okay, maybe it was a hit and run. And so that uncertainty could actually be completely natural to say, it's actually not clear what happened here. But then that doesn't mean it's immediately a cover-up. It simply means we can't tell exactly what's going on here. Are we supposed to snap our fingers and instantly know exactly what happened? And so, Timmy, I'm going to put you down because it's so hot. Sorry, Woofy. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because there's not clarity, doesn't then immediately mean there's some conspiracy going on. And I'm not trying to say there isn't a certain level of confusion and possibly subterfuge. But the argument I'm trying to make is that it would be natural from both the investigator's perspective and for the family's perspective, the investigators to say, this is what it looks like, and then later on to say, actually, we've changed our mind, it doesn't look like this. So you can understand that from the investigator's perspective. You can also understand from the family's perspective, what's going on here. This is highly irregular. You first say it's a murder, then you say it's an accident. So which one is it? So can you see how it would be natural to be uncertain, cautious, and suspicious under those circumstances? Do you follow with that? Yeah, so you can't blame her for feeling distrustful. Yeah, they are still going to exhume the body. Thanks a lot, publicly buzzed. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to the letter. So that she says, finally, investigators determined he was beaten to death. He was attacked so violently that the entire side of his face was rebuilt with putty for his funeral. So let's just pause on that for a second. So, you cannot but be sympathetic not only to Sandy, but to Stephen as well. What a horrible thing to happen to you. Something similar to this happened to one of my best friends, and it's not a pleasant thought, and you can't help feeling emotional and angry. I mean, I still am all of this time later. It's a horrible thing to happen to someone that you love, right? And so I think that adds to that sense of righteous indignation. You're absolutely right to feel indignant, angry, and all the other things, right? But the question is, and this is my question, and you can decide for yourself whether it's a reasonable, rational, appropriate question, or unreasonable, irrational, inappropriate question. The question is this: is a situation that causes such a gross amount of damage, is that likely to be caused by a human being wielding something, or is it likely to be caused by some kind of vehicle traveling at a certain speed that is creating impact force that is actually inhuman, almost impossible? And that's one of the things that I think that they're going to determine when they perhaps look at the skull and they look at the depth of the impact. So, for example, you can imagine in a baseball bat type blunt force trauma situation that you would have small kind of indentations in the skull, right? Compared to if you have something metal that is being driven by an engine, for example, a truck, that is going to cause far more catastrophic damage to bone. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm trying to say the force that a human being can wield is whatever it is. And the force that a machine can wield with all of that momentum behind it is totally, totally different. And so what we are seeing here in this description, that the entire side of his face had to be rebuilt with putty, as horrible as that is to hear, it seems to suggest an extreme amount of catastrophic damage. Now, just based on that, just intuitively, does that seem more like a human being did this, or a machine? And I know it sounds like quite an unscientific question and seems like quite unscientific reasoning, but it's important just to keep that question mark in the back of your mind while we take it from this point forward, right? The other thing that I disagree with here is it's not blunt force trauma, it's actually sharp force trauma. Something very sharp created a hole in the skull. In other words, something that resembled a bullet wound, right? So it's sharp force trauma, not blunt force trauma. So Sharon Edwards says more likely a machine. I don't want you I say this with with respect and with not trying to be nasty, trying to be kind. Try not to decide either way. Try and just allow both options to stay in your mind at the same time, right? Now is not the time to say, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. Try and keep both possibilities floating. Keep them, what do they call it? Suspend belief, suspend disbelief, and then see which one starts weighing more on you just naturally, and which one becomes less what's the word? Not likely, but less reasonable in a sense, right? In other words, let the force of gravity automatically find its way. Don't try and guide it on its way. Let the evidence find its balance on the scale. Do you see what I'm trying to say? The other thing that I think is very interesting is, and this is what I was trying to explain when I was doing the reenactment video. If Stephen was walking on the left side of the road, and this is quite difficult for me to visualize because in South Africa, we drive on a different side of the road. So it's quite difficult for me to see it without being like, whoa, is it this way or that way? But Stephen was walking on the left side of the road in the way that I imagine it in this particular scenario. And so the fact that he was caught on the right side, right, and I assume they mean his right side, right? So if I'm sitting here looking at you, this is my right hand, right? This is my right hand, and so my right eye is over here. And so the fact that if he's walking on the left side of the road and he got caught just on the right side may have meant that he kind of went like that whatever hit him just got hold of him, that maybe he thought he was just out of range of something and maybe even moved his head slightly, maybe sort of ducked, realizing at the last moment what was coming, and then was struck. And I can tell you, when I was a journalist, I went to do a story in Namibia, and I saw a train, like a desert train, moving over the desert landscape. And so I drove my car alongside. I just wanted to get a nice photo of the train passing from the front. And so I sort of, there happened to be a road alongside the train track. And so I drove at a speed to, and then I got past the train, stopped the car, grabbed my camera, ran to the train track. And I was standing right next to the train track trying to take a photo of this train from the front. And that train must have missed me by about that much, because what I didn't anticipate was that train had a kind of the front part of the train had a kind of a dust guard, something that I guess it shovels the sand away. And it's not just as wide as the train, it is substantially wider. And I'd never seen a train like this. This is the first time I'd experienced a desert train. And so I'm standing there, I'm not really looking at the train through, I'm looking at the train through the camera, but I'm not getting a proper sense of this is where you are, this is where the edge of the tracks on, this is where the train is coming from. And it's just by pure miracle that massive, um, almost bull bar of metal didn't strike me in the face. It could well have killed me, hitting me straight on. It was just pure luck that I felt the wind as it just passed right by me, probably millimeters, right? And so I'm just saying there's a simple thing of a train's coming. I know the train's coming, and I'm sure, and I think I've got it under control. And there's something protruding from that train that I didn't anticipate. And I was lucky. I came out of that, as I felt it passed by, and I was like, whoa, I didn't realize that, right? Stephanie says, I had a friend who was hit by a car, his shoe did come flying off. I think what's also interesting is in cycling, sometimes you get thrown off your bike but those shoes are fairly tight though. Okay, so anyway, let's continue. I'm glad Cotton Stars, thanks for that. Okay, so obviously my experience doesn't mean this is what happened to Stephen. I'm simply saying, think about it. I'm not saying because that happened to me that definitely happened here. That would be projection and transference. Just simply means you can be walking somewhere and you anticipate that you know that, or you suspect that you're safe when you're not. Okay. So she goes on to say, Hampton investigators, that's also very important to emphasize. Hampton investigators, we know from the Murdoch trial, we know that some of these investigators are dodgy. We know with the investigation into Mallory Beach that some of the investigators are dodgy. And so we've got a precedent for dodgy investigators and dodgy investigations. So that's also a question mark that you can put in the back of your mind and say, that's also something we need to look at. But do we have any definite proof of that? So, because you can say we made a mistake, we thought it was a projectile. That doesn't mean someone purposefully tried to mislead anyone. It's a mistake. But at what point does it become a deliberate mistake? And I think the phone data may go into that area. Thanks a lot, Verbal Judo. Thank you. So Hampton investigators asked us at that time to continue to publicly say it was a hit and run. Now, Sandy may think that is nefarious. Sandy may think that is not right. But I don't know if I don't know if there's anything wrong with that, right? they couldn't seem to find proof that someone murdered Stephen. And so what would the logical assumption be here? Right? What would the logical assumption be here? Thank you so much, Mary. Mary says, thank you very much. And I don't know whether some of you disagree with me. Do some of you think that she had every right to say that it was murder? But then at that point, I think she would have needed to say what she thought at this point. I believe, this is her words in this scenario, I believe Buster murdered my son. But can they prove it? And, you know, it could be as simple as, did Buster have an alibi or didn't he? Again, a lot of these things can be simple, but then maybe you can't get those simple answers. If I was Buster, if you're watching this and you've got an alibi, well, then that makes things real simple, real quickly. This is where I was. Here's my phone data. Look at somebody else, right? But anyway, the point is, the investigators saying that it was a hit and run. Maybe that is what the investigators genuinely believed, and we do know they were genuinely looking into trucks and seed trucks and logging trucks and, you know, farm vehicles. So they were legitimately investigating it as a possible hit and run, and they didn't find any projectiles. The other thing that I think is important to note, and you kind of have the situation in the JonBenet Ramsey case, and I've kind of mentioned this fleetingly as well. In the JonBenet Ramsey case, you can look at the missing. There's a crushed in piece of skull. Sorry about this being very graphic, but there's a shape and a size and a width to the crushed in piece of skull in JonBenet's skull, right? There's a long crack, but there's a crushed in area, and that could possibly be matched to a flashlight or part of a bat. And so, in other words, what that's telling you is the kind of object that made this injury. Now, if a bat made the injury in Stephen's case, then you very likely would be able to see that sort of injury, and I would submit that you're not going to see that kind of injury. I don't know that for a fact. I'm speculating in terms of that, but based on what I know in the JonBenet Ramsey case. Yeah, it's a good question, but let's just take this step by step. Let's just go through it step by step. So all I'm trying to say is I'm trying to defend the notion that in the absence of a bullet, in the absence of a bullet cartridge, in the absence of a bullet path, that certainly, so that would have been a homicide if you found that. They didn't find that. That's the one side of it. The other side of it, which I feel quite strongly about, and as I say, I would love to show you these photos, but we're dealing with very sensitive, it's very graphic and it's very sensitive. I think love is the wrong word. It would be very helpful if I could show you these images, because what you see is there's a phenomenal amount, and I apologize for what I'm describing. There's a phenomenal amount of, let's just say, bodily fluid where Stephen is lying in the road. And, you know, a injury like the one that he has, where so much of his skull is missing, if the scene is staged and if he wasn't killed where he was found, then you wouldn't have that large amount of blood right there, right? Because he would have bled somewhere else. The other thing is, if he was carried and put down in the road, you would probably find, in the same way that you talk about if he was struck in a conventional way by a vehicle, that you would have blood spatter, you would also have a blood trail. If someone carried him there and put him down, you would have a blood trail. And the thing I don't like about the staged thing, and that's what I believed in the beginning. I believed, well, him lying in the middle of the road, that does seem staged. That was my original thinking before I really delved into this. But the fact he's got road rash as well does make it unlikely that he was killed somewhere else, not involving a road. Does that make sense? Thanks. Thanks. Is it Nikki or Nickel? Nikki. Thanks, Nikki. Okay. So let me continue. So do you see why I'm saying it's not necessarily this diabolical plot to say that it, can you say publicly that it's a hit and run? The point is that you can't really prove at this point that it wasn't, right? You've heard someone say it could be something else, but that's hearsay. Anyway, let's go on. The first call my family received after the murder, again, she's calling it a murder. They're saying it's a hit and run, she's calling it a murder, was from authorities. Now, if the FBI are reading this, what do you think they think of a mother repeatedly saying murder, murder, murder? And I know who murdered my son. It's this person. And I know because that person said so. It's not giving necessarily factual information, it's giving he said, she said information. Do you see that? Okay. So this is where the murders seem to be have some connection. Now we know from that article that I showed you guys from News Nation, where it says Randy came to the scene, he went through the crime scene tape. Alex Murdaugh did as well. Nobody knows what the brothers were, why they were there. And so you've got to ask the question, how did this all come about? And can Randy Murdaugh provide an explanation for this? Can he say, categorically, I did or I didn't call? If I did call, why did I call? Thanks a lot, Mary. Thank you. The other thing is, if the murders are ambulance chases, if they make money from personal injury cases, why is he offering to work pro bono, right? So this is where the plot seems to thicken a little bit. Why are you offering to work for free? And wasn't a similar offer made to Connor Cook? Don't worry, we'll represent you. I don't actually know that for a fact. I'm just asking. Didn't someone offer to represent Connor Cook? And the interesting thing is, she says, Stephen's father accepted the offer, but we were unsure why Mr. Murdoch wanted to help us. And so that should be a very big question. Number one, if I was the lawyer covering this, number one, did a Murdoch offer to help? And although you might say that's a yes or no question with a yes or no answer, can you prove it? Can you prove that Mr. Murdoch did? And so I guess if the call was made in the police station, maybe there's a police officer who stood there when the call was made. So maybe there are witnesses to that. Maybe they can summon call records from either Randy Murdoch or the law firm, presuming it was made from the law firm. So first of all, the first question is, did A. Murdoch offer to help? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then why did he offer? But let's get the answer from him. We can prove that you were interfering or you were, kind of inveigling. What's the word? You were trying to, what's the word? Inveigle. Let me just get the pronunciation right here. Is it inveigle? Persuade someone to do something by means of deception or flattery. Yeah, did you guys get that? Okay, one more time. So is that what happened here? Was there some inveigling? Right? And so that's something that I would love to see the lawyers ascertain for a fact. Did you call? Did you offer? What is that all about? What's your explanation? Then she goes on to say, we weren't sure how he found out so quickly, even before it was confirmed to be our son. And I think that's something that I think makes sense. How come you were on the scene so quickly? And I suppose one possibility is that if you're a personal accident lawyer, that you would have your what do you call it? Your spotters or your the people that pick up the phone and call you would be, for example, someone at a hospital, someone who drives an ambulance. They, like you get talent scouts for models. You may have personal injury lawyers that have people in certain trades, such as the people who do they call it a wrecker, people who drive those vehicles that go and collect crashed vehicles. You'd have someone like that call you. Certain hospital staff in the what do they call it? I'm just trying to think. ICU, right? In the trauma thing, you'd have a nurse or someone who works there call you and say, "Hey, someone's just come in." You would imagine if you keep going to the same place that you'd get to know some of the locals, and you give them your card and say, if you call me, I'll give you whatever, right? You might have something like that. Yeah, tow truck driver. Okay. So then he says, surprisingly, after just a few interactions, Mr. Murdoch stopped returning our calls. Now, what that could have been is he was doing ambulance chasing. He found someone, but then he found out that there's a potential link to Buster and rumors going on. And he thought, okay, this is kind of a radioactive case, right? On the other hand, maybe he can give an explanation for why he stopped returning calls. Not likely, but who knows? And then this is where I kind of have a bit of a problem with this letter. People talking isn't evidence. People speculating isn't evidence. So she mentions Stephanie being approached multiple times by friends saying that this person or that person was responsible. And you might say, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. But you'll see in the one story that is provided, it just seems a little unlikely. In other words, I saw the murder happen. Well, then shouldn't it be like case closed? Here's a witness to a murder. Well, let's have a murder trial, right? So she says, as a family, it was suspicious to us because he had taken an immediate interest in the case and then he became unreachable so quickly. It may be suspicious, and it may be suspicious holding hands with, well, it's murder, now it's hit and run, but it may also be perfectly reasonable. It could be, well, it was hit and run, and I'm not gonna take on this case for whatever reason. Then she talks about these suspicions reached new heights weeks later when Stephen's older brother Chris was approached at work by a young man he did not know. Now, what I don't like about this statement is there are a lot of references to people, but there are no names and no dates and no statements. It's just someone came up to someone and he said that. That's not evidence. This person, well, who is this person? This person told Chris that he was present when Stephen was murdered. That's an incredibly bold statement to make. But so who is this person? He witnessed everything firsthand. So what did he witness? Where did it take place? When did it take place? How did it take place? You know, where's that? And so why wouldn't you provide this person's name? But it's sort of like six of one, half a dozen of the other. It's like somebody saw something, but I can't tell you who it is. Oh, someone said something, but he was told if he says anything, he's going to get killed. But here you are saying what he said. So what is it? He can say something or not, right? Yvonne says that's why a new investigation is a good thing. Yeah. Anne says, so you believe everyone but the mother. No, that's not true. I've just said to you that the way that Randy Murdoch got involved, and as far as I know, his firm have said that he didn't get involved. But if he did get involved, and if it's true that Alex and Randy were there, I think that needs to be explained. So it's not like it's like ignore. That's something that we do want to deal with. But I certainly am not going to give out a credit card and just say literally everything you're saying here is let's go and arrest Buster right now and charge him with murder. I mean, by the same token, someone could write a letter about you, a letter like this about you, and they don't need any facts. They just need someone else saying that you did something. Should that be enough to charge you with murder? Should that be enough to charge you with murder? Someone made a really good comment here. How tall, Josie, good to see you. How tall was Stephen? So one of the things you're going to want to do in a reanimation thing is know how tall he was, know the angle of his limbs, know the angle of his limbs to the line, know the exact height that he would have been to be struck over here. Know the force that had to be applied to create all of that, and also how far should he have fallen if he was struck by something at a particular force, which would suggest a particular speed, and where would he or should he have ended up? And if all of those calculations animated show something plausible, then I think you could say, okay, a hit and run isn't out of the question here. If it's totally implausible and being struck would have more likely knocked him off the road than into the middle of it, well then that's another way of looking at it. Elise says, thanks, Nick, got to run. Okay, thanks a lot for that, Elise. Take care. Yeah, Elena says this letter was written 7 years ago. Anne says, I believe Sandy Smith wants the killer found Okay, but just bear this in mind. This is a letter she wrote 7 years ago. What I'm saying is I'm saying, and I'm sure if Sandy's watching this, she might say, "That's how I felt 7 years ago. I've had a bit of a change of heart, or I understand that I need to take a step back." I'm simply saying, if I'm the FBI reading this letter, I'm going to have certain reservations. And what I'm trying to share with you is how you need to think critically, not emotionally. I'm not saying that you shouldn't worry about these things. You should. I'm not saying you shouldn't care. You should. I'm not saying you should ignore certain things in this letter. You shouldn't. What I'm trying to say is you can't let emotions, anger, indignation override logic and evidence and facts and truth, right? That's all I'm saying. And by the same token, you don't simply say, let's be scientific about absolutely everything and forget that, a young man, with his whole life ahead of him, lost his life in a tragic way. Does it matter? Of course it matters. Can we try and figure this out? Yes, let's try and figure it out, but let's do it the right way. That's the argument I'm trying to make. Someone says hate crime, sorry. Okay, that is important. It's important to look at the fact that the fabric of the society and Stephen's sexuality. That's also important to look at. The thing that I think is quite interesting is that he didn't hide his sexuality. And so, does that take you one way or the other? Does it mean that things were starting to become easier in 2015 or not? Yeah, we know he didn't do anything to himself. We also know he wasn't under the influence. Okay, anyway, let's continue. So she says, so this is really an extraordinary claim that a person said that he was present when Stephen was murdered and he saw everything. He said that he saw Buster, who had graduated with Stephen, but she should actually be saying here, who had graduated the previous year, beat Stephen to death with a baseball bat. And so you kind of got to wonder, did this person have a bone to pick with Buster? Is this person trying to throw Buster under the bus for something else? I'm just trying to think what the other thing was. I think there's an allegation somewhere else. I'm not sure if it's also in this letter, claiming that Paul killed Stephen. So you've got one person saying Paul did it, and someone else saying Buster did it. Anyway, so this is what I don't really get. Stephen was murdered because he was gay. And so what I would like to know is, have there been any other hate crimes like this in Hampton County? Do they happen all the time like this in Hampton County? What is the crime rate in South Carolina? Violent crime has gone down. So I don't know, when I Google hate crimes in Hampton County, nothing comes up except the Stephen Smith case. So I would imagine if there's been a pattern of hate crimes, that it would be logical to assume that this was a hate crime. I'm not saying that homosexuals aren't bullied or treated in a bad way, perhaps in the South as well. But to elevate this to a hate crime, if there's been that kind of thing taking place in a serial capacity, then you might say, you know what, there's serious hatred going on here. But what is someone doing awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning? How does that work? I mean, you can understand if it's in a bar. I don't mean understand in the sense that it's right. I mean, it makes sense in a criminal psychology sense that in a setting like a bar, or where there multiple men and multiple women, that someone might be triggered in a certain way, and that would then make sense in terms of thinking that. But in the middle of nowhere, someone walking around, how do you know that he's gay? How do you know who he is? It's dark. How do you know? Do you follow what I'm trying to say? How do you go all the effort to go and find someone outside of the context of someone being homosexual? Someone's just walking down the road. How did you know that they'd be walking down the road? How did you know that they would be there? And then what has upset you so much about this person who's a student at I'm just trying to let me share that with you while we're on that subject. Did you guys know that Stephen was a student at Orangeburg Calhoun Technical College? You guys know that? Let's do this. Right? He was a student at Orangeburg Calhoun Technical College. That was where he was on Tuesday. Wendy, welcome. And on his way home, he passed by Bobcat Landing, and that is where he swam. And presumably he was swimming until midnight or so. And then he drove the rest of the way before he either had engine trouble, ran out of fuel, or something else happened. And so look at that distance, 84 miles, almost 2 hours of driving. And so do you follow when I say the following? The further you drive a vehicle, the better the chance you're going to run out of fuel. So if you were just driving 5 miles, it would be very unlikely that you'd run out of fuel, all things being equal. If you're driving half an hour, it would be unlikely. This is a fairly significant journey, almost 2 hours worth of driving, and it's almost 84 miles. And you could argue that he was very close to his destination when theoretically he did run out of fuel. And how many times have you done that? I know I did that a lot as a student. My vehicle was permanently in reserve, and I had it down to a fine art. I was able to explore the reserve margin. As I say, I had it down to a fine art. I think there was one or two occasions where I literally ran out of fuel, and I was able to coast into the garage, the gas station, because I'd underestimated my fuel by 50 meters or something. So he is also a student, and did he underestimate how much fuel he had, or overestimate how much fuel he had? But how many of you here did the same thing when you were at university? You sort of played dangerous games with putting in just enough fuel to get by. Yeah, that's it, living on the edge. And so I'm just saying that's one possible explanation. Another possible explanation is that his engine overheated, or that his sister said in the one documentary that the wiring to his vehicle was faulty and loose. He couldn't actually get his car started. So there are three possibilities here: that he ran out of fuel, that there was some other engine trouble where the engine literally seized for whatever reason. Perhaps it just wasn't maintained very well, or what's the third one? Fuel, oil, or there was some electrical problem, and that happened to me in a terrible thing when I was in Johannesburg once. I was driving, and literally the car, all the electronics went off suddenly, and I was in the middle of a 3-lane highway, and I just didn't have enough momentum to get from the outside lane to the off the road, and so eventually that vehicle came to a stop in the middle of a 3-lane highway. Yeah, right. So things like that can happen, and so maybe he did have engine trouble, right? Maybe he did have engine trouble. That's why he got out the vehicle, and the the information that I've recently learned was that he was going to stay with his father, not with his mother, with his father and his sister on the night that he was killed, and that they lived right around the corner from there. In one of the incident reports, they say that he was on his way, is walking on his way home. Now, I don't know exactly what that address is, but I presume it may have been 3 or 4 miles, and he was maybe a mile away when he got struck. And so maybe he thought, I'm not going to phone anyone because they're going to ask me where I was, and also I don't want to disturb them. I was up all night. I live just around the corner. I'll get there. Yeah, that is what I'm talking about. And the big thing is, so apparently his sister said she was waiting. She was expecting him home that night. She was waiting for a call that never came, and then, well, we know what happened after that. But the other thing is, he may not have wanted to speak about where he was. He may not have wanted to say, I was there. Well, who were you with? And he may not have wanted to have that conversation. Anyway, let's go back to the letter. The witness said they were out smashing mailboxes when they came upon Stephen, and Buster seized the opportunity. And I think that would be quite easy to confirm. Were there smashed mailboxes in that area? Because there are not very many houses. Is that statement true? It would be very easy to confirm. There are just a handful of houses in that area. The young man told Chris that Buster threatened to kill him if he ever spoke up. This information was given to investigators, but nothing has come of it. Now, you might say this information was given to investigators and nothing came of it because there's a cover-up, but it could also be because there's nothing to this story. It's a claim. It's a unsubstantiated claim. In reviewing a copy of the 911 dispatch log, which I've enclosed now, this is a lot better, because here there is some specific. There are specifics. There are names. There are times. And there are specific facts. This is a lot of a better scenario. She says, I reviewed the dispatch log. I found the first responding officer, Michael Bridges, there's his name. He arrived on the scene within a minute of 911's dispatch. Even though in the Hampton County Sheriff's Office incident report, he claimed to have driven around for a while trying to find my son's body. So, yeah, that is, I think, a legitimate concern. So what's the story there? What's the story there? The second officer, Jason Eubanks, arrived within 2 minutes. This is suspicious to me because the area where my son was placed is extremely rural. Cops do not patrol that area frequently, and it's not likely an officer would coincidentally be patrolling there prior to 5 a.m. It's also possible that one or both of those officers live in that area. That's also possible. But I don't know, at face value, this does seem strange, doesn't it? But I like this paragraph so far the most. I think about this entire letter. This has got names, times, and it's a reasonable concern. How long did the police take to respond? What were they doing there? What was going on when they got there? Is there body cam, right? The other thing that I think is worth noting here is at what time do you start the clock? Like, at what time was Stephen actually killed? Anyone know the answer to that? At what time was Stephen actually killed? That's a good question. Does the car still exist? So I've heard between 1 and 4 o'clock. That's quite a long span of time. 3 hours between 1 and 4 o'clock. And if you look at the incident photos, the blood actually looks fairly wet. It actually looks fairly fresh. It's still a very red color. Even the wounds on his arms look still quite fresh, if that's the word. And so it actually seems like he was hit. I'm not quite sure when they found him. Did they find him? She talks about 5 a.m. Prior to 5 a.m. It actually seems like he may have been, this may have happened closer to 4 a.m. than to 1 a.m., right? And this is quite important. The later this happens, right? So we know for a fact from the toxicology that he wasn't drunk and he wasn't on drugs, right? But if he was sufficiently sleep deprived, if he was sufficiently tired, he may have made an error in judgment that has got everything to do with sleep deprivation. So if he was walking around at 3 o'clock in the morning, compared to 2 o'clock in the morning, compared to 1 o'clock in the morning, all I'm trying to say is the less sleep he's had, the more akin it is to being drunk. The more he may make a simple error that he walks a bit more on the one side of the road, or he underestimates the fuel that he has, or whatever it is. Does that make sense? Someone says, who called 911? There's I think an African American who was driving, who saw someone in the road. What time was the 911 call? I'm not 100% sure. Cotton Star, could you have a look if you're still in chat? It's a good question. That's true. Okay, let's continue. So she says they had to be in that area at that time for a reason. I suspect they were there because they already knew Stephen was there, and I suspect the Murdochs were the ones who told them. You can see that she's quite fixated here on the Murdochs, but you could have another situation as well. You could have had someone else saw something besides the person who called 911. And instead of calling 911, called the Murdochs, right? You could have had a situation like that. She then talks about the Murdochs are probably the most prominent family in Hampton County. Stephen had on more than one occasion mentioned to friends and his twin sister that he was involved romantically with someone from a prominent family in the county who was hiding his sexuality. He said that it would shock people to know this person was gay. We suspect this could be the young man Stephen was referring to, though he never named him. And so everyone has assumed this to be a Murdoch, but I mean, what's not mentioned here was that his boyfriend was a 40-year-old man. So it can't be Buster. I mean, his boyfriend can't be Buster. And that's not mentioned here. That's not mentioned anywhere in this letter. In other words, what I'm saying is, in this letter, she doesn't mention Stephen's boyfriend. Why not? Did she not know who Stephen's boyfriend was? Because, I mean, that's part of the police statements. Also, this guy that supposedly was Stephen's boyfriend, more than twice his age, made inconsistent statements, and I don't think he sat down for a polygraph. Why is that not mentioned in this? Can I tell you why? Because he's not a Murdoch. Well, I guess you could put the question mark there. Is it because he's not a Murdoch that doesn't fit the scenario here? Yeah, Alina says, who else is prominent in the community? So who knows, maybe the boyfriend was a prominent member of the community and he was worried that he would be implicated. And so he asked one of the Murdochs to kind of represent him or to run interference for him. In other words, a scenario where a homosexual boyfriend knew that his lover was killed in kind of strange circumstances, and he was worried about potential fallout. And so he hired a Murdoch to protect him. And this is a scenario where he's innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. Could there be a scenario where someone wasn't innocent and he did do something wrong? That, I guess, is the alternative. Okay, let's continue. It's almost midnight here, so I'm not going to carry on for too much longer. At the beginning of the investigation, officers told us we would not have access to Stephen's text messages for approximately a year. That is strange. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I do know in the Oscar Pistorius case that they struggled to crack his phone, and by the time they did, I don't think there was anything on it. So the phone data aspect, I think, is probably her strongest point. And like I said at the beginning of all of this, either way, Sandy wins. If no data has been removed, then you can see what was being said and who was being communicated with, and was there any mention of Buster, right? On the other hand, if information has been deleted, then I think there may be some sort of cover-up. So the absence of evidence is evidence. So she talks about, in some detail, about why did they not send the phone to Apple? It's been over a year and we have no knowledge of who Stephen interacted with by phone. The flip side to this is that they did find out what was going on his other devices. They found that he was using the pseudonym Noah Rivers, I think, and that he was trying to meet other homosexuals on forums. And this is what Sandy's lawyer described as high-risk behavior, and is high-risk behavior. Having intimate contact with people you barely know, like you saw in the Delphi case, right? It's very dangerous. So that is a legitimate thing, and that is something they probably can ascertain now because they did find his phone, right? Okay, let's go on to the next paragraph. Since the murder, Buster has gotten rid of his old vehicle. I don't know about you, but when you are at a student age, you tend to go through vehicles fairly quickly. So I don't know. I don't know really what to make of this. I would be interested to know what color his old vehicle was, what make the old vehicle was. They found blue flakes of paint in Stephen's clothing, which is associated with Toyota. So what kind of vehicle did Buster drive? What kind of equipment did the Murdochs keep in their stores, right? What I'm going to say now, I think there's even people on Patreon, even my own, what do you call it? My own community. I don't think completely agree with my thoughts on this. There seems to be consensus that because Buster was only injured in his upper body, his shoulder, his face, and his arms, that automatically means he was beaten. That automatically means that he couldn't have been hit in a hit and run. And I've been at pains to say, isn't there a possibility that he could have been struck by some kind of non commercial, a non sort of ordinary vehicle, something that has got a protrusion or something sticking out, at a certain height above the road. And I've been at pains to make that argument because it's quite an unusual setting. It's a country road. The farms in the area definitely use very different equipment to what you'd find in the suburbs. There are logging trucks. There are people carrying trailers, and so that's something you'd want to look at. Charlotte says, I can't believe how long the phones will take to be released. Well, at that time, it certainly would have been a long time. Now, I think they could probably get the information quite soon, assuming that they can retrieve it. That is a good point. That's a very good point to say why, they shouldn't be operating at that time. 100%. So that's the other thing why I would say you might need a cover up, because possibly a vehicle like that operating at that time of night was doing so because they were cutting corners in some way, or doing something they weren't supposed to be doing, or the what do you call it? Some kind of contract with a vehicle specifies that you can't operate it at night or whatever it is. Are you allowed to drive a tractor on a road after 10 p.m.? I don't know whether there are any municipal regulations like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are. Because certain equipment like that, tractors don't necessarily have headlights. Or do they? I don't know. The songbird says logging trucks hit the road quite early. So if Stephen was struck closer to 4 a.m., and bear in mind he actually had class that day. So whatever happened that night, I think was unanticipated. He didn't expect to have car trouble. Maybe he didn't expect to have so much fun, you know, at the Bobcat landing. But as we know, with a lot of students can burn the midnight oil, get 1 or 2 hours sleep, and be back doing what they want to do, right? Yeah, there's no street lights, definitely no street lights. Another possibility is there are a couple of homes in that area, and maybe someone was returning home from wherever drunk. You could have that possibility as well. Maybe it's a farmer who had a quick drink and then went home, and is just bringing home something that he's bought, a trailer, whatever it is. Anyway, let's finish up here. I do think this is quite an important point, that Stephen's wallet was found in his own vehicle and the gas cap was open, and all of that definitely means that this isn't a very clear-cut case either way. Like, you can't just look at it and say it's definitely that or definitely that. And that's why I say keep an open mind. So my explanation for the wallet being still in the vehicle is that he may have actually lost it. It may have fallen out of his pocket. It's happened to me quite a few times. That's exactly where it does fall. So he thought the wallet was in his pocket. He got out the vehicle. Maybe he got a mile or two from the vehicle and realized, damn, I don't have my wallet with me, but I'm not going to go back for it. Or maybe he turned around and went back to get his wallet. And then whatever happened, happened. He ended up being in a situation that he didn't expect, right? But also, if this is a hate crime, if you say this is a hate crime, why wouldn't they steal his wallet? That's the other side to that. The thing about the gas cap being open, it's hard to say. My immediate response to that is it does look a lot like staging. I've never looked inside my gas tank to say, oh, I see I don't have any gas. But maybe his vehicle was more busted up and maybe things weren't working. So let's imagine the following situation. Let me put this on a full screen. Let's imagine the following situation. You're a 19-year-old, you're not that au fait with motor vehicles, you're not a mechanic, right? And you're driving alone down a road, it's late at night. You know that you don't have a lot of fuel in the car, right? That's already a given. I know I don't have a lot of fuel. And then suddenly the car cuts out. And now you have a situation where you can't turn the car on to see if what the fuel situation's like. The car's sort of cut out, right? So then in a situation like that, you might think, well, how do I fix the situation? Is it the wiring? And we know his sister said there was a wiring problem earlier that day. I think he'd complained about a wiring problem that day. You guys remember that coming up? I don't know if it was on HBO or Netflix, but you remember that being stated that there was a wiring problem, that he earlier had a problem with the wiring. Do you remember that? Now, if the car just cuts out, he might be thinking, did I just run out of fuel or is it the wiring? And because you can't check the fuel by simply turning on the ignition because of an electrical fault, maybe that's why he opens the gas can and looks inside, shining with the light of his cell phone. And maybe if he sees, oh, I do have fuel, but now I can't really start this vehicle. Okay, so I'm going to walk back. So in other words, would it have helped to phone his sister if the problem wasn't that he didn't run out of fuel, but it's some kind of electrical problem? Do you follow what I'm trying to say? That it would make sense to say, well, if I've got an electrical problem, it's another problem again. No one can really help me. You know what I mean? It's kind of a complex. It's more complicated than just putting in fuel. Does that make sense? That kind of level of reasoning. Yeah, that's a good question. What were their fingerprints? Did they dust for fingerprints? Okay. Now, some of you aren't going to like this. I disagree with Stephen's mother where she says Stephen was very skittish and would never have walked down the road in the dark. And it's not likely he would have opened his car door to accept assistance from someone he didn't know. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm totally out of line saying this, but to say that Stephen was skittish and he would never walk down the road in the dark, it seems like he was at a swimming hole in the dark with a 40-year-old man. Well, that is an assumption I'm making. I don't know for a fact that the 40-year-old was at the swimming hole, but we do know that he was taking part in risky behavior online. And so I don't know if you can say for a fact that he was skittish in general, that he wouldn't take certain risks, right? Do you follow what I'm trying to say? Also, the fact that he was on the road, that this happened between 1 and 4 in the morning means that until he had engine trouble, he probably felt like he was in control. He was doing what he wanted to do. He was where he wanted to be at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know if I agree with that. Do you agree with that? That because I think he's skittish, he would never have been walking down the road in the dark. Does that sound right to you? Now you might say his mother would know. His mother would know that. I can't remember where I read it. I think his sister said it, or someone said that sometimes he would want to avoid people and then he would walk through a forest. Anyway, I don't quite. Oh, here it is. It's actually in the letter. Let me read that part. I'm not trying to criticize Sandy, and I'm not trying to be nasty. I'm simply trying to deal with her argument, the case against Buster, essentially, and just say what is merit and what maybe doesn't have merit. What is more merit and what is less merit. And I think this is less merit, to say he was even known to walk through the woods during the day to stay out of sight. I don't know whether that proves that he's not skittish, or that he is skittish. What do you guys think? Yvonne says moms are the last to know. Take it from a boy's mom. Okay. Thanks, Miami Lifestyle. Yeah, he was being secretive in the last weeks, according to his sister. Okay. Then she says his autopsy shows his toxicology reports were negative for drugs and alcohol, so I have no reason to believe he would have done something so completely out of character. That I think one's got to go back to what Yvonne said. Moms are the last to know. You don't really know what teenagers are really up to, um, you know. And teenagers do tend to be the most. I mean, whenever anyone who's a teenager, that tends to be the most reckless time of your life, of anyone's life, right? Charlotte, it appears that he, according to the police reports, they were saying where he was found was between his vehicle and his residence, and at that time he was living with his father. He was living with his father and living with his sister. Okay. Then, since Stephen was placed on the highway, it became a highway patrol investigation. I'm not going to deal with that paragraph. Not going to deal with that paragraph. Okay, let's deal with this paragraph. Our concerns regarding Solicitor Murdoch and his family have not been investigated despite witness accounts, which include an alleged conversation. Quite interesting, she uses the word alleged here, not really elsewhere, between a schoolmate of Buster's little brother, Paul, and school officials. I was told that he claimed to have knowledge of the murder. This is a second person that's apparently either a witness to the murder or has knowledge of it, implicating Buster as the murderer. Those school officials were said to have discussed the statement with the student's family. So it was discussed, but maybe she has a point. The police maybe need to follow up on that. According to my source, and again, she doesn't name the source, Paul was transferred from that school to a private school after the alleged statement. So she's saying it's because of that thing alone that Paul was transferred. So it would be good, if that's a fact, if Paul was transferred, what is the official reason given? Bear in mind, there was a housekeeper that died. But it kind of reminds me of, so Paul was transferred from a school and Buster sold his vehicle, and that's evidence enough that they are guilty of suspicious behavior. I'm not sure if that is sufficient. I don't really want to, I'm going to kind of end off now. It's kind of approaching my bedtime. It's almost 20 past midnight, but I don't want to go into too much detail, except to say there did seem to be some argy-bargy between the Dr. Erin Presnell and the coroner. But, you had the same difference of opinion in the JonBenet Ramsey case. When it's not clear what happened to someone, you can have a situation like this, that a deputy coroner and a pathologist have a difference of opinion and they start arguing. In the Idaho case, you kind of had not quite that situation, but you kind of had people taking issue with that coroner saying what kind of wounds were perpetrated and how severe they were, and people seem to be wanting to put words in her mouth. All I'm trying to say is when there's a certain amount of uncertainty, the stakes go quite high, and I don't necessarily see some kind of conspiracy here between what the one says and what the other one says. You saw it. I think you also saw it in the Rebecca Zahau case, where one person saw this and another person saw that. But a very good example is JonBenet Ramsey, where, especially in terms of, I don't want to say the words, but where they were looking at whether there was a certain amount of sexual something, and one doctor saw virtually nothing and someone else saw something almost equivalent to RAPE. And it's those different level of subtleties, and people can get very passionate and argumentative about it within investigative circles, and people as well in the true crime community, because a lot rides on the outcomes to that. What else? She says there are no skid marks or vehicle debris consistent with a hit and run crime. And so while that's true, could there be a way that you could have a hit and run that doesn't have vehicle debris? So, for example, a industrial type vehicle, an industrial type equipment doesn't have fragile glass and plastic edges the same way commercial vehicles do. You know what I mean? So is there a possible explanation where there could be hit and run? Or is it murder is the only possibility here? And that's why we've kind of gone to that statement by the lawyers where they say we're going to try and keep an open mind. Let's have a look at the poll. The murders are involved somehow 40%. We know very little about what happened, 24%. That's the second most. Sandy thinks Buster killed Stephen. I think that is what the letter is angling at, 22%. And then a lot of hearsay, very few facts, 14%. So if you put the two together, the murders are involved somehow, and Sandy thinks Buster's involved. That's 62%. That's 60% of you think there is definitely a connection, and it's a kind of 60-40. That's how it appears at the moment. Well, I'm definitely starting to feel like I could nod off. Someone mentioned a backhoe. Iceland, welcome back. So, Mickey, do you have any source for that claim? Is there anywhere you can? That's interesting, but can you find a source for that? Is there any document or news story where you can provide that source? That's interesting, Robbie. Good to see you as well. Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that comment. Okay, this I just want to play a little piece from the one interview, but I want to just deal with. Is it here? No, it's not. I just want to quickly play a little excerpt from one of the. Oh, it's over here. Let's just go through this briefly. Let me know if you can hear. Uh, you can't hear. Let me see if I can redo it. So sorry about that. Not quite sure why it's do that. Share screen. Okay, let me know if you can hear now.
On the end of the day, it may be that it was a vehicular manslaughter. That's still a crime. That's still somebody that's driving around in the state today.
So yeah, you've got Eric Bland basically saying at the end of our investigation, we may actually find that it could be the hit and run. In other words, vehicular manslaughter. So they are not, how can I put it? They haven't excluded that possibility, right? And then the next lawyer basically says he thinks that that is very unlikely, and he'll give the reason. Sorry about the lack of sound. Can you guys hear now?
Who hit and killed a young man and didn't stay and take responsibility. We don't think that's going to be the case, but that very well may be the conclusion.
Thanks, Eric. From Blair at Live 5. If the court does not give permission to exhume Stephen's body, where does that put this investigation?
Ronnie?
Well, we hope that's not going to happen, Blair. We think we have good cause to show why a fresh set of eyes on this would be beneficial. Obviously, it would be a significant setback. Yes, we could still hire investigators to go back and kind of recreate the steps, look back at those communications that Eric talked about, see if we can find some fresh new leads. But it kind of has to start with a fresh new look at the body and an independent determination of that cause of death. And as Eric said, it may be that investigation is confirmatory of what's already been said about the cause of death. We don't think that's true. You know, as a native South Carolinian, if you don't know someone in South Carolina, if you haven't struck a deer in South Carolina, you know someone who has. And this is a terrible analogy, but if you strike an animal on a highway in South Carolina, vehicular debris is everywhere.
So I just want to stop it over there and make the following point. One of the weaknesses I find in true crime and in investigations and in just the whole pursuit of justice is statistical analysis. That's something I've worked in statistical analysis. I studied statistics, and one of my first steps that I take when I investigate a case is I do a statistical analysis. So I look at what the statistics, if it's something that is where there's a statistical allegory, let's put it that way. And if there isn't something like that, then you look at something where there's a, let's call it what is reasonable under these circumstances, right? And often you're wrong. Often you assume, you know what, I think this person was kidnapped, and you find out that kidnappings are really rare, right? Whatever the case is. And so what he's talking about here is that if you live in South Carolina, you've either struck a deer yourself or you know someone who has. What does that already tell you? That there's quite a lot of vehicles crashing into objects on roads. It's happening all the time. And then you might say, why is that happening? Why in South Carolina are deers struck? Well, one reason is because there are a lot of rural roads, because there's a lot of dark roads, because there's a lot of wilderness, because there's a lot of subtlety and subtle variation in the way that the road's going, whatever it is. We have the same thing in South Africa. We've got vast open spaces, and the kudu like to cross the road at night, and same thing happens, right? And so you're already getting a admission here that there's plenty of road carnage taking place between vehicles and animals, right? A vehicle on the road at night hitting an animal that's blinded in some way or whatever. Now, could you not have a person in a situation where they are tired and they think that they are walking in the right place, and maybe a vehicle strays, or maybe the person strays, or maybe both. I don't know. But I'm just trying to say that he's just kind of acknowledged just how common it is. And then he makes the case that typically it's associated with X, Y, Z, and that's another argument. What's the other thing that I wanted to say about that? Okay, let's play a little bit more.
And the fact that Stephen's body is apparently placed in the middle of the roadway and there's no debris of any kind present really leads us to believe that that is not what caused his death. So I don't care if it's the mirror, the bumper, what part of the car might have struck him. It just makes no sense to us that he could be struck in that fashion badly enough to cause his death and there be no vehicle debris of any kind whatsoever. So we hope by presenting this to the court that they will see that there is good cause shown why an exhumation is proper in this circumstance.
So I did make the comment at the beginning of this live stream. I said something like, does there have to be murder in order for there to be a cover-up? Is a cover-up only going to be, what's the word, an option if there was murder, or can you also have a cover-up based on accidentally riding into someone, right? And as far as I know, even in South Carolina, if you strike an animal, aren't you supposed to own up to that? Are you allowed to strike an animal in South Carolina and then just sort of drive on, or are you obliged to report it? Anyone from South Carolina? If you hit a deer in South Carolina, are you supposed to call it in, or can you just keep driving? And so you can have a situation where all of it's true. There is a cover-up taking place, but not a murder that's been covered up. And we'll see what it turns out to be.
And that is the key part of the investigation.
Yeah, don't forget,
Thanks, Ronnie.
Ronnie. Don't forget, Ronnie, that Stephen had loose shoes on. So if you're hit by a vehicle that's going fast enough, that's going to project you, your shoes are just going to fall off under the best of circumstances. His were loose and untied, so it's almost inconceivable that his shoes didn't come off. So those are all reasons. Additionally, I think that the fact that there's so much public interest in supporting Sandy's cause of trying to find out really what happened, I would find it hard to believe that a judge would take the position, no, we don't want to give a grieving mother, the answers that she's looking for.
Okay, let's take it a bit further.
Whether they will share information with us, I can tell you we will share information with them. Even though it may not be a full two-way street, the more information that we could put on SLED's desk or the AG's desk that we may acquire, and again, that's the word may acquire, I think will be beneficial.
Eric, you said that there was a grand jury impaneled into Stephen's death, so it's no longer active. So does that mean the AG's office has kind of dropped this, or what information do you have about that?
I don't have any information other than they're no longer in panel. So it means one of two things: that they returned an indictment and the AG is sitting on it, which I highly doubt, or there was just not enough information that was garnered over the past 2 years. Remember, this investigation opened up, according to SLED, based upon a finding of something during the investigation of Alex's murder of Maggie and Paul. We don't know what that is. We don't know what caused it. Mandy, do you have any knowledge of what that could be? You're on mute.
Yeah, I just a couple things here.
What kind of phone data are you seeking to discover?
I'll give this to Ronnie, but first I want to thank you, Whitney, for hosting this. You did an amazing job putting this together within 24 hours, McDuff Communications. So appreciate that. So Ronnie, go ahead, talk about the phone data.
Yeah, I mean, to say we want it all is kind of cliche, I guess, but we do data downloads on devices all the time in litigation. So what we'd be seeking to do on his mobile device is download everything and to track as best we can all of his movements for that period of time leading up to his death, certainly. And as Eric said, take a look back for a period of time and try to find out who were those people that he was in regular communication with. And this will lead us into the investigation. This will be the leads that the investigators need to get into the field and start asking questions about what were his relationships, what were his contacts, who was he talking to, and about what. It's only through getting boots on ground in this fashion and spading through these lines of communication that we can hopefully find that thread that leads us to the real information about Stephen's death.
I'm trying to find the part where they asked about Buster. It is somewhere in here. But I do think Stephen's very last texts are going to be very interesting. And I also think if you can literally get all the information, it may actually provide you with an insight into Stephen's behavior. How often did he come home late at night? How often did his vehicle break down? How often did he visit particular individuals? How many individuals was he visiting? What types of communications was he having? What was kind of being said, kind of thing. And that could give you a tremendous amount of insight into, who knows, he may even have sent messages while he was walking along the road to whoever he was swimming with at the swimming hole. I've just had bad luck. Here I am. No, don't worry about it. I'm almost home, kind of thing. In other words, he may, in his own words, have described his situation. Maybe it seems like a lot to hope for, but who knows? So we could get tremendous insight just from recovering the data from his phone.
Now again, it's our working assumption that this was not just a hit and run, but that something else happened. Now, if the facts don't bear that out, they don't bear that out. But we don't think that's the case.
Thanks, Roddy. We're going to take one final question from Dylan. Do you intend to publicize the findings of the investigation?
Okay. I'm trying to find where they ask about
everybody in his orbit, which would be all family members, his sister, obviously, Sandy, friends that'll come forward and tell. It's nothing to do with this. And whatever.
What was Stephen Smith's true cause of death? And if it was something other than as has been reported, then we hope at that point in time to re-enlist all the resources of the state of South Carolina to engage in a new investigation and to find real answers to what happened to Stephen.
Now, my personal feeling about this is that the Stephen Smith case is a chance, in a way, for the legal cogs in South Carolina that have been challenged, that have been undermined, that have been stained, that have been damaged by the murders, this whole situation. The Stephen Smith case is, in a way, an opportunity to demonstrate true justice and investigating something and taking something out of the shadows and the dark and putting it in the light. And this time dealing with someone who's not privileged, someone who's not prominent, someone who has been denied justice for a long time in a totally different way. And will we see that take place? And obviously, this is a case where the public have provided the money. The public have provided the, the driving force for all of this. And so it's a chance to blow new life and new confidence back into the legal apparatus in South Carolina. So I really hope that does take place. Whatever the outcome, I hope that and it looks like they've got the right people on the job to do that. And now I'm going to play just a clip where Sandy Smith's lawyer talks about this idea of Buster's involvement. I think it's the next question.
Yeah, as we believe, Whitney and Ronnie, as we sit here today, Buster is a victim. He lost a mother, a brother, and now his father's in jail. Buster, as we know, has nothing to do with this. And whatever is mentioned in the records, that's what investigators are going to look at. But we have no knowledge at all about Buster or the Murdaughs having anything to do with this right now. We're starting with a fresh set of eyes.
Okay. And I think that's very important to end this live stream on, because what I wanted to do in this live stream was juxtapose the contents of Sandy's letter with some of these statements. And this is from her lawyer, right? And that's why you've got to be careful saying, someone told me this, so I know he's been murdered. Someone told me this, so I know he's the murderer. Can you prove it? If not, it's defamatory. And that's why you've heard Buster saying exactly that. You've got to be careful if you're the media. You've got to be careful if you're a lawyer. You've got to be careful if you're the victim's mother, making claims that you can't prove. This investigation is going to be all about proving, finding out what happened and being able to prove whatever that is that happened. And so we'll see what does happen. So it is going to be very interesting what does come to light, because I must say, as much as I've provided my thoughts on what happened here, what I think happened here, it is very mysterious. There are certain things that don't seem to make sense. And so it's going to be very interesting seeing the pieces of the puzzle start coming together. And I think the phone data is going to be a big part of demystifying what is quite a mysterious case. Do you guys agree? Yeah, starting with a fresh set of eyes. And so we need to come into every case we've got to have a fresh mind and an open mind. And as I say, the mark of a good investigator is that you keep your mind open and you absorb information, you're curious, you investigate, you discover, you find out, you collect information for as long as possible, right? When you look at cases like the Murdaugh case, you see the case files, that takes shitloads of time to accumulate. But that's exactly what is necessary, to spend a lot of time piecing together all of that information into a cogent narrative. And often I see in true crime, there's this rush to be able to, it's almost like with the least possible information, with the least possible information, let's decide who's guilty. Let's try and get away from that habit. I know people want answers very quickly. People want simple answers to difficult questions. And certain YouTubers provide that. They say, you know what, I think that person did it. Let's try to be, more sophisticated in our intelligence gathering. And it's the mark of a good investigator not to rush to judgment, but to absorb for the maximum amount of time. Yeah, I think it could have gone cold, definitely. And it's okay to say, like what Stephanie says, it's okay to say, I'm not sure exactly what happened here. I need more information. And that's exactly what we do need. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So we'll see. Miami says, you taught me patience. We do need to have an open mind. Okay, so I'm going to end right there. It's, almost 1:45. I really need to grab a pillow. My dog's down here sleeping at my feet, so I'm not going to rouse him, although he'll probably get up when I get up. I want to thank everyone for joining me. I will be doing Van Gogh letters around about the same time slot tomorrow, episode 42, I'll be sharing some video I took in all. So if you part of Team Peachtree, go and check it out. And I just want to thank everyone who subscribed to Team Peachtree. Thanks so much for helping get the channel over the 1,000 subscriber mark. I really appreciate it. Thanks to all the mods that have been here. It's really good to see you guys again. Iceland, Stephanie, Terry. I know that SM Kowalinsky was here. Bria as well. Thanks, guys. Thanks to all of you for being here. Iceland says, love Team Peachtree. Cool. Okay, so Bria, the good news is this will be on at a time that's, humanly possible for you to check out. So I hope to see you there. Iceland says, take care, everyone in this community. Everybody take care. What else can I tell you before I sign off? It's a good question. Can you see what cell phones pinged in the area that long ago? It's a good question. I don't know. Epiphanes has just joined us from Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. Welcome, but I'm just about to sign off, but thanks for joining us. Our thoughts are with Nisi. Our thoughts definitely are with you. We haven't seen you for a while, but we'll talk a little bit about Nisi in the next episode of Van Gogh. So if I don't deal with that, remind me, but I'm sure I will remember. Magical Mother says, I managed to perk up a bit. I'm glad to hear that. Bria says, I love the beautiful and loving side to TCRS. It's important to acknowledge the light, isn't it? Okay, Team Peachtree tomorrow. See you guys then. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. All the best.